My sister turned our dad's funeral into a personal drama show and demanded half the donation money. When I refused to support her lies about our stepmother, she broke into the house and stole family heirlooms, so I had her arrested. I never thought I would be writing about something like this, but here I am. People always say funerals bring out the worst in families, and I guess they were right. My sister Jessica, 28F, has always been the type of person who needs to be the center of attention, but what she did during our father's funeral crossed every line I can think of. My dad Robert, 55M, died last month after a 6-month battle with liver disease. It started as what doctors thought was just fatigue from work stress, but by the time they figured out what was really wrong, things had progressed too far. Dad was a truck driver for 23 years and never missed a day of work until he got sick. He was the kind of man who fixed everything around the house himself and taught me and my brother Marcus, 25M, how to change our own oil when we were teenagers. Dad lived with our stepmother Linda, 52F, for the past 8 years. They never officially married, but she took care of him through everything. Linda works as a night shift nurse at the county hospital, so she knew exactly what Dad was going through medically. She would come home from 12-hour shifts and still help Dad with his medications and doctor appointments. Jessica moved back in with Dad and Linda about 2 years ago after her boyfriend kicked her out of their apartment. She told everyone it was temporary, but she never paid rent or helped with household expenses. Dad never asked her to leave because he said family always has a place at home. Jessica works part-time at a retail store and spends most of her free time posting on social media about her various interests and complaints. Marcus lives about 40 minutes away with his wife Sarah, 24F, and their twin boys who just turned 3. He visits every Sunday and always helps Dad with yard work and home repairs. Marcus works construction and has been trying to save money to buy his own house. I live about 20 minutes from Dad's place with my girlfriend Emma, 26F. We've been together for 4 years and we're planning to get engaged next spring. I work as a mechanic at a local garage and have been there for 6 years now. Now here's where everything went wrong. During Dad's last week, he was mostly sleeping and Linda was taking time off work to be with him. Jessica was also home, but she kept leaving to hang out with friends or go shopping. She would take photos of herself looking sad and post them online with captions about how hard everything was for her. On Tuesday morning, Dad seemed more alert than usual. Linda called me and Marcus to come over because she thought it might be one of his last good days. We sat with him for a few hours, and he was able to talk a little bit. He told us he was proud of the man we had become and that he wanted us to take care of each other. Jessica was at work during this time. That evening, Dad's condition got worse. Linda called Jessica to come home, but Jessica said she was having dinner with friends and would be back later. Linda tried calling her again around 9, but Jessica didn't answer. Dad passed away at 11:30 that night with just Linda holding his hand. The next morning, Jessica came home and found out what had happened. She immediately started crying and saying she should have been there. Linda explained that she had tried to reach her multiple times. Jessica then said Linda should have kept calling until she answered. Linda just walked away from that conversation. This is where Jessica's behavior became completely unacceptable. She called Marcus and me, crying about how she was Dad's little girl and how much he loved her most. She said she was the one who should be making all the funeral arrangements because she was living with him. I reminded her that Linda had been Dad's partner for 8 years and was handling everything. Jessica didn't like that answer. She called the funeral home directly and tried to change the arrangements Linda had already made. The funeral director had to call Linda to confirm who was actually authorized to make decisions. Linda had to bring Dad's will to prove she was the designated person for funeral arrangements. Then Jessica decided she needed to write Dad's obituary herself. She wrote 3 pages about how she was Dad's favorite child and how special their relationship was. She barely mentioned Marcus and me, and she wrote 1 sentence about Linda. When Linda showed us the draft, Marcus and I told her it was completely inappropriate. Linda ended up writing a proper obituary that honored Dad's life and mentioned all of us equally. The viewing was scheduled for Thursday evening, with the funeral service on Friday morning. Jessica spent Wednesday posting on social media about how she was planning the perfect tribute to her father. She shared photos of flowers she was ordering and talked about the special music she had chosen. Linda had already ordered flowers and chosen music, but Jessica went ahead and made additional arrangements without telling anyone. Thursday evening at the viewing, Jessica wore a black dress that was more appropriate for a nightclub than a funeral. She positioned herself right next to Dad's casket and cried loudly whenever anyone came to pay their respects. When people came to offer condolences to Linda, Marcus, and me, Jessica would interrupt and start talking about her own grief. My Uncle Tom, who is Dad's older brother, came with his wife and kids. When he hugged me and said he was sorry for our loss, Jessica pushed between us and grabbed Uncle Tom, sobbing about how she missed Dad so much. Uncle Tom looked confused and patted her shoulder awkwardly while looking at me with raised eyebrows. The same thing happened when my boss came to pay his respects. Jessica had never met him before, but she threw her arms around him and cried about how hard it was to lose her father. My boss had taken time off work to be there for me, and Jessica made the whole interaction weird and uncomfortable. During the funeral service on Friday, Jessica sat in the front row next to Linda but kept making loud sobbing sounds throughout the entire ceremony. The pastor had to pause twice because her crying was so disruptive. When it came time for people to share memories of Dad, Jessica got up without being invited and gave a 10-minute speech about how she was Dad's special daughter and how their bond was stronger than anyone else's. After the burial, there was a reception at the church hall. Linda had arranged for Dad's co-workers and friends to have a place to gather and share stories. Jessica spent the entire time collecting sympathy from everyone who attended. She would approach groups of people and start crying about how much she missed Dad and how she didn't know how she would go on without him. The worst part happened when people started leaving. Several of Dad's friends and co-workers had given Linda cards with money inside to help with funeral expenses. Dad didn't have life insurance, and Linda had used her savings to pay for everything. Jessica saw the cards and asked Linda what they were. When Linda explained they were contributions to help with costs, Jessica said she should get half the money because she was Dad's daughter and had been living with him. Linda looked at Jessica like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She told Jessica the money was to reimburse funeral expenses, not to be divided up among family members. Jessica argued that she had expenses too and deserved her share. Marcus stepped in and told Jessica she was being ridiculous, which made her start crying again about how no one understood her grief. That night, Jessica posted a long message on social media about how she was being excluded from decisions about her own father and how some people didn't appreciate how close she and Dad were. She didn't mention that she had missed his final hours because she was out with friends, or that Linda had paid for everything, or that she had tried to take money meant to help with expenses. The next day, Linda asked Jessica when she was planning to move out. Jessica said she had nowhere to go and that Dad would have wanted her to stay in the house. Linda reminded her that the house belonged to both of them according to Dad's will, but that didn't mean Jessica could live there indefinitely without contributing. Jessica accused Linda of trying to kick her out during her time of grief. I talked to Marcus about everything that happened, and we both agreed that Jessica's behavior was completely out of line. Marcus said his wife Sarah was disgusted by how Jessica acted at the funeral. Emma said she had never seen anyone behave like that at a funeral before. The final straw came when I found out Jessica had been telling people that Linda hadn't really loved Dad and was just using him for a place to live. She said Linda was trying to steal Dad's house and belongings from his real family. This was completely false and incredibly hurtful to Linda, who had taken care of Dad for years and used her own money for his funeral. I confronted Jessica about the lies she was spreading. She claimed she was just telling the truth about Linda's motives. I told her she needed to stop talking about Linda that way and apologize for her behavior at the funeral. Jessica said I was taking Linda's side over my own sister and that Dad would be disappointed in me. That's when I realized Jessica was never going to take responsibility for what she did. She genuinely believed she was the most important person in Dad's life and that everyone else should center their grief around her needs. She can't see how her behavior hurt everyone who was trying to mourn Dad properly. So now I'm wondering if I should just cut contact with Jessica completely. Marcus is leaning toward doing the same thing. We both feel like we can't trust her or have a normal relationship with someone who would act like this during our father's funeral. Linda is dealing with her own grief and doesn't need Jessica's drama on top of everything else. Has anyone else dealt with a family member who made a funeral all about themselves? I keep thinking about how Dad would have hated the way Jessica behaved, but I also don't know if cutting off my sister is the right thing to do. Part of me thinks she might eventually realize how wrong she was, but another part of me thinks this is just who she is and she's not going to change. I wasn't completely ready to do that yet, so I decided to give her one more chance to apologize and change her behavior. That was a mistake. About a week after, Jessica called me crying about how lonely she was and how much she missed Dad. She said she wanted to get together and talk about memories of him. I thought maybe she was finally ready to have a normal conversation about our grief, so I agreed to meet her for lunch. The lunch meeting was a disaster. Jessica spent the entire time talking about how hard everything was for her and how she felt like everyone was against her. She said Linda was being mean to her and making her feel unwelcome in Dad's house. When I asked for specific examples, she said Linda had asked her to do her own laundry and buy her own groceries. I pointed out that those were normal expectations for any adult living in someone else's house. Jessica said Linda was supposed to take care of her because that's what Dad would have wanted. She claimed Dad had told her she would always have a home there and never have to worry about anything. Then Jessica brought up the money again. She said she had been thinking about it and decided she definitely deserved half of the donations people had given for funeral expenses. Her reasoning was that she was Dad's biological daughter while Linda was just his girlfriend. I reminded her that Linda had paid for the entire funeral out of her own savings while Jessica contributed nothing. Jessica got defensive and said she would have helped pay if anyone had asked her to. I pointed out that she works part-time retail and has no savings, so she couldn't have contributed much anyway. She said that wasn't the point and that Linda should have asked her first before making arrangements. The conversation got worse from there. Jessica started crying about how I was being mean to her just like everyone else. She said I used to be her favorite brother but now I was choosing Linda over family. I told her I wasn't choosing anyone over anyone else, but I also wasn't going to support her unreasonable demands and behavior. Jessica then revealed something that made me realize how delusional she really is. She said she had been talking to a lawyer about Dad's will and her rights as his daughter. She wanted to challenge Linda's inheritance of the house and Dad's other belongings. She thought since she was living there and was his blood relative, she had a stronger claim than Linda. I was shocked. Dad had specifically chosen to leave everything to Linda in his will. He made that decision when he was completely mentally competent, and he had good reasons for it. Linda had been supporting him financially and emotionally for years, while Jessica had been freeloading off both of them. I asked Jessica if she had actually consulted with a lawyer or if she was just thinking about it. She admitted she had called a few law offices and talked to receptionists about consultation fees. Most of them told her she would need several $1,000s up front, which she doesn't have. Then Jessica asked if I would lend her money to hire a lawyer. She said it would be an investment because we would all get our fair share of Dad's estate once she proved Linda wasn't entitled to everything. I told her absolutely not and that I thought she was making a huge mistake. Jessica got angry and accused me of being brainwashed by Linda. She said Linda had turned me and Marcus against our own sister and that Dad would be ashamed of how we were treating her. She stormed out of the restaurant without paying for her meal, leaving me to cover the bill. That evening, I called Marcus to tell him about the lunch conversation. He said Jessica had already called him asking for money to hire a lawyer. When he refused, she had sent him several angry text messages about family loyalty and how disappointed Dad would be in both of us. Marcus also told me something I hadn't known before. Apparently, Jessica had been going through Dad's belongings while Linda was at work and taking things she wanted. Linda had noticed some of Dad's tools and personal items were missing but hadn't said anything because she didn't want to cause more conflict. I drove over to Linda's house that evening to talk to her about what Jessica was doing. Linda looked exhausted and older than I had ever seen her. She confirmed that Jessica had been taking Dad's things without asking. Linda said she had been trying to be patient because she knew Jessica was grieving, but the situation was getting impossible. Linda showed me a list she had made of items that had disappeared from the house. It included Dad's watch, some of his tools, a few pieces of furniture, and several photo albums. Linda said she particularly wanted the photo albums back because they contained pictures of her and Dad together over the years. I asked Linda why she hadn't told me and Marcus about this earlier. She said she didn't want to cause more family drama and had hoped Jessica would eventually return the items on her own. Linda also admitted she was afraid of Jessica's reaction if she confronted her directly. The next day, I went to Jessica's new apartment to talk to her about the missing items. She had moved out of Linda's house the week before and rented a small place across town. When I walked in, I could see several of Dad's belongings displayed around the apartment like trophies. Dad's watch was sitting on Jessica's nightstand. His favorite coffee mug was in her kitchen cabinet. A wooden chest that had belonged to our grandfather was being used as a coffee table in her living room. The photo albums were stacked on a bookshelf. I asked Jessica about the items, and she said she had taken things that reminded her of Dad. She claimed she had as much right to his belongings as anyone else and that Linda had plenty of other stuff to remember him by. When I pointed out that she hadn't asked permission, Jessica said she shouldn't have to ask for her own father's things. I told Jessica she needed to return everything to Linda, especially the photo albums. Jessica refused and said Linda could make copies of any pictures she wanted. I explained that the albums themselves had sentimental value beyond just the photos, but Jessica didn't care. The argument escalated when I threatened to call the police if she didn't return Dad's belongings. Jessica laughed and said the police wouldn't do anything because she was Dad's daughter and had a right to inherit his things. I reminded her that Dad's will specifically left everything to Linda, but Jessica said wills could be contested. I left Jessica's apartment without resolving anything. That evening, I called Linda and told her everything I had seen. Linda started crying and said she just wanted Dad's memory to be honored properly instead of being turned into this ongoing conflict. Marcus and I decided we needed to take action. We went back to Jessica's apartment together the next day and demanded she return Dad's belongings. Jessica refused to let us in and threatened to call the police on us for harassment. We ended up having a loud argument through her apartment door while neighbors came out to see what was happening. Jessica finally opened the door and screamed at us about how we were terrible brothers and how Dad would hate us for siding with Linda over his own daughter. That's when I realized there was no reasoning with Jessica. She had created her own version of reality where she was the victim and everyone else was against her. She genuinely believed she was entitled to Dad's belongings and had done nothing wrong at the funeral or afterward. Marcus and I left and went straight to Linda's house to discuss our options. Linda said she had been thinking about changing the locks and not giving Jessica a key, but she felt bad about completely cutting her off. I told Linda she needed to protect herself and Dad's memory from Jessica's destructive behavior. We decided that Linda should change the locks and that Marcus and I would handle any future communication with Jessica. We also agreed that if Jessica didn't return Dad's belongings voluntarily, we would help Linda take legal action to get them back. The situation has completely changed how I see my sister. I used to think she was just immature and attention-seeking, but now I realize she's something much worse. She's selfish to the point of being cruel, and she doesn't care who she hurts as long as she gets what she wants. What I thought was just selfish behavior has turned into something that feels almost malicious. She's been actively trying to turn other family members against Linda and has been spreading lies about all of us. About 2 weeks after my last post, Jessica called our Aunt Carol, who is Dad's sister. Carol lives about 3 hours away and wasn't able to come to the funeral because she was recovering from surgery. Jessica told Carol that Linda was preventing Dad's children from grieving properly and had kicked her out of the house with nowhere to go. Jessica also told Carol that Linda was selling Dad's belongings and keeping all the money for herself. This was completely false. Linda hadn't sold anything and was actually keeping Dad's workshop exactly the same as he had left it. Jessica made it sound like Linda was profiting from Dad's death while his children got nothing. Carol called me upset about what Jessica had told her. She said she was considering driving down to confront Linda about her treatment of Dad's children. I had to explain the real situation to Carol, including Jessica's behavior at the funeral and her theft of Dad's belongings. Carol was shocked when she heard the truth. She said Jessica had been very convincing and had cried throughout their entire phone conversation. Carol admitted she had been planning to offer Jessica money to help with rent since she thought Linda had thrown her out unfairly. I realized Jessica was probably calling other relatives with the same lies, so I started reaching out to family members myself. I called our cousin Mike, who lives in another state, and discovered Jessica had already contacted him too. She had told him the same story about Linda being cruel and greedy. Mike said Jessica had asked him for money to hire a lawyer to contest Dad's will. She told him Linda was trying to steal the family inheritance and leave Dad's children with nothing. Mike had been planning to send her a check until I called and explained what was really happening. This made me realize Jessica had probably contacted every relative she could think of to spread her lies and ask for money. I spent the next few days calling everyone I could remember from Dad's side of the family to make sure they knew the truth. Most of them were understanding once they heard the real story, but a few seemed to think there must be some truth to Jessica's claims. Our Uncle Paul said that even if Jessica was exaggerating, Linda should still share Dad's belongings with his children. I had to explain that Linda had offered to let us take anything we wanted that had sentimental value, but Jessica wanted expensive items to sell. The situation got even worse when Jessica started posting about Linda on social media. She made posts about how hard it was to lose your father and then be betrayed by someone you trusted. She didn't mention Linda by name, but anyone who knew our family would understand who she was talking about. Jessica's posts got a lot of sympathy comments from people who didn't know the real situation. She responded to every comment with more details about how she was being mistreated and how she was just trying to honor her father's memory. Reading her posts, you would think Linda was some kind of evil stepmother who had manipulated Dad and stolen everything from his children. Linda saw the posts because several people told her about them. She was devastated that Jessica was publicly portraying her as a villain when she had spent years caring for Dad and had paid for his entire funeral. Linda asked me if she should respond publicly with the truth, but I advised her not to get into a social media fight with Jessica. Then Jessica crossed a line that made me realize she was beyond any hope of redemption. She contacted Dad's employer and told them Linda was fraudulently claiming benefits that should go to Dad's children. Dad's company had provided a small death benefit to Linda as his designated beneficiary, which was completely legal and proper. The HR department at Dad's company called Linda to verify her relationship with Dad and ask about Jessica's claims. Linda had to provide documentation proving she was Dad's designated beneficiary and that Jessica had no legal claim to the benefit. The whole situation was humiliating for Linda and completely unnecessary. I was furious when Linda told me what Jessica had done. Trying to interfere with Dad's employment benefits crossed into fraud territory, and I realized Jessica was willing to break the law to get money she thought she deserved. Marcus and I decided we needed to take stronger action. We went with Linda to a lawyer to discuss our options for getting Dad's belongings back and stopping Jessica's harassment. The lawyer said we could file a police report for theft of the belongings and could pursue a restraining order if Jessica continued her harassment. The lawyer also warned us that Jessica could potentially file a will contest, but it would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. Dad's will was properly executed and witnessed, and he had clearly been mentally competent when he made it. The lawyer said most courts wouldn't overturn a will just because a child felt they deserved more inheritance. We decided to start with a formal demand letter asking Jessica to return Dad's belongings. The lawyer sent the letter by certified mail, giving Jessica 10 days to return everything or face legal action. The letter also warned her to stop making false statements about Linda and to cease all contact with Dad's employer and other family members. Jessica's response was predictable. She called me screaming about how I had sided with outsiders against my own sister. She said she was never giving back anything that belonged to Dad and that we could try to take her to court if we wanted. She claimed she was Dad's real family while Linda was just a gold digger who had manipulated him. Jessica also said she had been documenting everything Linda had done wrong and was building a case to prove Linda was unfit to inherit Dad's estate. When I asked what Linda had supposedly done wrong, Jessica couldn't give any specific examples beyond not letting her live in the house for free. The 10-day deadline in the lawyer's letter passed with no response from Jessica. We filed a police report for theft of Dad's belongings, but the police said it was a civil matter since Jessica claimed she had a right to the items. They suggested we pursue the issue through the courts instead of expecting criminal charges. We also filed for a restraining order based on Jessica's harassment of Linda and her interference with Dad's employment benefits. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Jessica was served with papers requiring her to appear in court. At the restraining order hearing, Jessica showed up with a notebook full of complaints about Linda. She told the judge that Linda was trying to steal her inheritance and prevent her from grieving for her father. Jessica cried throughout her testimony and claimed she was the victim of a conspiracy against her. Linda's lawyer presented evidence of Jessica's harassment, including screenshots of her social media posts and documentation of her contact with Dad's employer. The lawyer also had statements from family members describing Jessica's behavior at the funeral and her theft of Dad's belongings. The judge granted a temporary restraining order requiring Jessica to stay away from Linda and stop contacting Dad's employer or making false statements about Linda online. The judge also ordered Jessica to return Dad's belongings within 30 days or face contempt of court charges. Jessica was furious about the restraining order. As we left the courthouse, she screamed at Linda that she would never stop fighting for what was rightfully hers. She said Linda had turned her own family against her, but she would prove the truth eventually. That evening, Jessica violated the restraining order by posting on social media about how the court system was corrupt and had sided with Linda against Dad's real family. She claimed the judge hadn't understood the situation and that justice would eventually prevail. Linda's lawyer screenshotted the posts as evidence of Jessica violating the restraining order. We now have grounds to have Jessica held in contempt of court, which could result in jail time if she continues her harassment. I never thought my own sister would become someone I might have to help send to jail, but Jessica has made it clear she won't stop her destructive behavior voluntarily. She's turned Dad's death into an ongoing nightmare for everyone who loved him, and she doesn't seem to care who she hurts in the process. Update 3: This will be my final update about the situation with Jessica. A lot has happened since my last post, and I think the situation has finally reached its conclusion, though not in any way I would have hoped for. Jessica violated the restraining order multiple times over the following weeks. She continued posting about Linda on social media despite the judge's order to stop. She also tried to contact Dad's employer again, claiming she had new evidence that Linda was fraudulently receiving benefits. Linda's lawyer filed contempt of court charges against Jessica for violating the restraining order. Jessica was arrested and spent 2 nights in jail before being released on her own recognizance. The judge extended the restraining order for another year and warned Jessica that any further violations would result in longer jail time. After getting out of jail, Jessica seemed to escalate her behavior even more. She started driving by Linda's house at night and leaving voicemails on Linda's home phone number, which she had gotten from somewhere. The voicemails were mostly Jessica crying and talking about how much she missed Dad and how unfair everything was. Linda was becoming afraid to be alone in the house. She installed security cameras and started staying at her sister's place some nights when she felt particularly nervous. This made me realize that Jessica had crossed from being just a problem into being actually dangerous. The final straw came when Jessica broke into Linda's house while Linda was at work. Linda came home to find her front door damaged and several more of Dad's belongings missing, including some jewelry that had belonged to Dad's mother and was supposed to be passed down through the family. This time the police took the situation seriously because it was clearly breaking and entering. They arrested Jessica at her apartment, where they found all of Dad's stolen belongings plus some of Linda's personal items that Jessica had taken during the break-in. Jessica was charged with burglary, theft, and violating a restraining order. She spent a week in jail before her court-appointed lawyer managed to get her released on bail. The conditions of her bail included staying away from Linda's house and having no contact with Linda or any of Dad's former employers or co-workers. During this time, I had been going through my own process of accepting what Jessica had become. Marcus and I talked about it extensively, and we both concluded that we couldn't maintain any relationship with someone who would burglarize a house and terrorize a woman who was just trying to grieve for Dad. We decided to write Jessica a letter explaining that we were cutting off all contact with her. We told her that her behavior had been unacceptable from the beginning and had only gotten worse over time. We said we couldn't be part of her life while she was hurting Linda and dishonoring Dad's memory. Jessica responded by sending us both long text messages about how we had abandoned our own sister for an outsider. She said Dad would be ashamed of us and that we had chosen Linda's lies over family loyalty. She claimed she was the only one who really loved Dad and that we had never understood their special relationship. Jessica's criminal case went to trial about 6 weeks later. Linda had to testify about the harassment and break-in, which was difficult for her. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue that she was just a grieving daughter who had made some poor decisions, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Jessica was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 18 months in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Linda for the damage to her house and to stay away from Linda for 5 years after her release. At the sentencing hearing, Jessica was given a chance to make a statement. Instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, she used the time to complain about how everyone had conspired against her and how the justice system had failed to protect Dad's real family. She said she regretted nothing and would continue fighting for what was rightfully hers. Jessica is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility about 2 hours away. She has written several letters to Marcus and me asking us to visit her and help with her appeal. We haven't responded to any of her letters and don't plan to. Linda has been able to start healing now that Jessica is no longer harassing her. She returned Dad's belongings to their proper places in the house and has started going through his things at her own pace. Linda offered to let Marcus and me take anything of Dad's that we wanted as keepsakes, and we each chose a few meaningful items. Linda also set up a small scholarship fund at the community college where Dad took some classes years ago. She used part of the donation money from Dad's funeral to start the fund, which helps students who are studying to become truck drivers. It's a nice way to honor Dad's memory and help other people pursue the career he loved. Marcus and I have maintained our relationship with Linda because she was important to Dad and because she's a good person who didn't deserve what Jessica put her through. Linda treats us like family and always includes us in holidays and special occasions. As for Jessica, I'd had to accept that she's no longer the sister I grew up with. Maybe she always had these tendencies and I just didn't see them. Or maybe Dad's death triggered something in her that turned her into someone I don't recognize. Either way, I can't have someone in my life who would burglarize a house and terrorize an innocent person. I don't know what will happen when Jessica gets out of prison. She'll probably try to contact us again and might even attempt to resume her campaign against Linda. If she does, we'll be ready to involve law enforcement again and protect Linda from any further harassment. Some people have asked me if I think Jessica will ever change or if there's hope for reconciliation. Based on her behavior even during her sentencing, I don't think she has any intention of changing. She still believes she was right and everyone else was wrong, even after being convicted by a jury and sentenced to prison. I've learned that sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life, even when they're family. Jessica's actions showed me that blood relationships don't automatically entitle someone to unlimited forgiveness or tolerance. Dad would have wanted his family to support each other, but I don't think he would have wanted us to enable Jessica's destructive behavior. The whole experience has made me closer to Marcus and has helped me appreciate the family relationships that are healthy and supportive. Emma and I got engaged last month, and Linda cried happy tears when we told her the news. She said Dad would have been so proud and excited about the engagement. I still think about Dad every day and miss him terribly. But I'm grateful that his memory isn't being overshadowed by Jessica's drama anymore. Linda can grieve in peace, and Marcus and I can remember Dad for the good man he was instead of constantly dealing with conflict and legal problems. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything turned out with Jessica. The truth is, I regret that she made the choices she did, but I don't regret protecting Linda and standing up for what was right. Jessica had multiple opportunities to behave appropriately and chose not to take any of them. I hope this story helps other people who might be dealing with family members who cross boundaries during difficult times. It's okay to set limits and protect yourself from toxic behavior, even when it comes from relatives. You don't owe anyone unlimited tolerance just because you share DNA with them.